I can only imagine when that day comes, when I find myself standing in the sun. I can only imagine when all I would do is forever worship you. I can only imagine.
Hi, my name is Stephen Sindoni. Thank you for tuning in to The Road Less Traveled. Here in Part 5, I will share with you the 1980s. The 1980s were also another decade of highly charged global turmoil. But it was in this decade when it became clearly transparent that the United States government was in the opium and drug business. And here is where our story begins. The 1980s were known as the Me generation. Binge buying and credit cards became a way of life, and shop till you drop was the catchphrase. The 80s sustained the trend of the 60s and 70s, more divorces, more unmarried people living together, more single-parent families. The two-income families were even more common than in previous decades. More women went to college and earned advanced degrees, married, and had fewer children. The 1980s began with a double-digit inflation. America started the decade nearly $1 billion in debt at a staggering $914 million. I will refer to the 1980s as the Ronald Reagan years. It was a time we were still fighting communism around the world, or so it was thought by many Americans who bought into the government's propaganda. I, for one, knew it was about drugs. If I can use an analogy here, I was born at night, but it wasn't last night. In 1980, the newspaper headlines read, "Soviets and Mujahideen guerrillas clash in Afghanistan after Soviet invasion." Also in 1980, terrorists seized the Iran embassy in London. 5 people were killed in the rescue raid. And then there is President Jimmy Carter's orders failed military mission to rescue hostages in the United States Embassy in Iran. And during all this chaos, 87 million American TV viewers watch Who Shot JR? All the while I'm thinking, the question should be, who shot JFK, Martin Luther King, and Bobby Kennedy? And this was the year, 1980, that Ronald Reagan became president and Republicans gained control of the Senate. And George Bush was now vice president of the United States, and this was something to be concerned about. Then on December 8, 1980, there was another shot heard around the world. At approximately 10:50 p.m., John Lennon was shot and killed as he and his wife Yoko attempted to enter the apartment at the Dakota Building on West 72nd Street in Manhattan, across from Central Park West in New York City. Many believed at the time, including myself, that John Lennon's message of giving peace a chance was starting to take center stage in world affairs. John's message of imagine all the people living life in peace, nothing to kill or die for, where the world can live as one, was too much for these warmongers to handle. Maybe it was my inquisitive mind, or it could have been my Piscean nature. I was still asking the paradoxical $64,000 question, when will this great thinker appear? And why did they kill the messenger? And that's when the light bulb went off in my head. The messenger would have to have no political affiliation, religious or economical advantage over the masses. The message would have to come from one with a spiritual message. And would this event happen in my lifetime? Would I live long enough to see it? And I asked the final question of myself. Would I have to wait for the extinction of the Republicans, Democrats, and lobbyists? Would I have to wait until there was another ice age? But my thought was interrupted. There was another gunshot heard. In 1981, John Hinckley wounded President Reagan in an assassination attempt. 1981 was also the year that the first United States Space Shuttle Columbia makes its first inaugural flight. And 1981 was also the year that Sandra Day O'Connor became the first United States Supreme Court female judge. 1982 for me was a very significant year. The Vietnam Veterans War Memorial is dedicated in Washington, bearing 58,000 names. Significant for me because many of these soldiers died in vain guarding the poppy fields. I was one of the few Americans who understood the reason why these young men had to die. They were only pawns in the game. And 1982 will be remembered as the year for lethal injections. They were used as a death sentence for the first time. It was my belief that we had now taken a step backward towards our primitive nature. And 1983 was the year for propaganda. Ronald Reagan dubs the USSR as the evil empire. Also in 1983, a bomb planted by Shiites killed 87 at the United States Embassy in Lebanon. And here in 1983 is where the plot reveals itself. Ronald Reagan openly backs Contras against Marxist Sandinistas in Nicaragua. The American government now has an insatiable appetite to control the drugs in South America. Then in 1984, Martin Luther King Jr. Day becomes a national holiday. Yet racism in America is running rampant. The only people that are talking about love thy brother is the preacher. And 1984 is also the year that the AIDS virus is discovered. There are many who believe that AIDS is a man-made biological weapon. Then in 1985, the United States becomes the world's biggest debtors with a deficit of $130 billion. The United States military budget has skyrocketed. And in 1986, Ronald Reagan is cold busted. He admits to secret arms deals with Iran. It is the beginning of the Iran-Contra affair. The Iranian-Iraqi war is about the poppy fields. Then in 1987, President Ronald Reagan announces the United States' first $1 trillion budget. The fleecing of America has now begun. In 1988, the United States ship Vincennes accidentally shoots down an Iranian airliner, killing 290 people. Accidentally, on purpose. In 1988, George Herbert Walker Bush is elected President of the United States, defeating Michael Dukakis. In 1989, the United States invades Panama to oust Manuel Noriega. Rumors circulate that Manuel Noriega is part of a CIA drug cooperation between both countries and that he reneged to pay the drug money. Then in 1989, President George Herbert Walker Bush authorizes $300 billion tax dollars to prop up the collapsing savings and loan industry. This Bush authorization brought up a red flag to me instantly. Taxpayer dollars are now being stolen. But where is the money going? The answer to this question is Thailand. George Herbert Walker Bush would enlist his old friend, King Bhumibol of Thailand, to help launder the money. They would continue using the same banks they've been using for many years in their drug dealing trade around the world. The only thing left to do now was to track the money, and you would find out who the guilty parties were. But we found out the why, the reason for the wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran, and in Vietnam. There was no war on communism, nor was there a war on terrorism, nor was there a war on drugs. It was business. It was the opium business. They didn't call George Herbert Walker Bush Big Poppy for nothing. And that concludes our series, The Road Less Traveled. If you'd like to hear more, please go to stephensindoni.webs.com. There's a book that you can purchase at my site, Sindoni Says. I'd like to thank everyone for watching The Road Less Traveled.
I can only imagine when all I will do is forever worship you. I can only imagine